959.
Back on Get Down to Business, the show that's all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. And we are joined by Alan Shusterman, who is the head of school for tomorrow. And he says that it's time to bring education into the 21st century. Alan, why are we so far behind?
Why are we so far behind? Well, K-12 education as an industry, if you look at it, has changed less than any other industry in this country in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, period. We're basically still teaching kids to prepare them to enter the world as it existed in about 1980. And the methods we're using to teach kids and the whole model of education, model of schooling we're using is an industrial age model that is antiquated. So
compared to educational systems around the world, where would you think that the American system ranks?
That's a good question. It's not necessarily that other countries are so far ahead of us, although there are certain countries such as Finland and now Australia where they definitely are doing more stuff that is innovative and 21st century appropriate. But what's sad about this country is in this great capitalist country where we're usually ahead of the world in everything, at this point we're middling at best in the world.
So as you say, the name of your school is School for Tomorrow. What makes it for tomorrow? Why are you different?
In 1,000 different ways. I wish I had 2 hours, but let me go to begin with the following. We are taking education into the age of customization. Every other industry we look at in this country has completely evolved. In education, we still basically are in a one-size-fits-all model, or basically four sizes fits all. So customization means, among other things, that we're aiming to have our students learning whatever they're learning in that moment at the level that makes sense for the individual student, at the pace that makes sense for the individual student, in the ways that make sense for the individual student. Right now, we classify students according to age, number one, and then some sort of rough sense of whether they're smart or dumb, and then we expect them to move along kind of the conveyor belt of our industrial age model and hit arbitrary benchmarks that have nothing to do with what the kid is really prepared for or not prepared for.
Well, Alan, I must ask, you sound like an intelligent guy, and I know School for Tomorrow was it has not been around for very long. What possessed you to one day decide to change the educational system and not just do it for the students in the Maryland area, but actually to preach this and to go on the airwaves and talk about why our system is broken and the steps that we need to make to change it? What was it in the shower one day?
No, it's a bit more complicated than that, although a lot of good stuff happens in the shower, in my mind at least. Don't take that out of context, please, when you do clips. Here we go. I was actually a good student myself, and because I was a good student myself, I was lucky enough to end up at a fancy college called the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And because I ended up at Penn, I did not become a teacher because even though I always wanted to become a teacher, because folks who go to fancy colleges don't generally go into education. Instead, I went to Harvard Law School, got out of Harvard Law School, hated doing what I was doing, but kept doing it for about 12 years until 13 years ago, my parents changed my life. And they sat me down and said, Alan, you've always talked about wanting to teach. And I said, absolutely. When I retire, I will teach. And they said, well, we've got some money saved, and we're not doing anything with it. And if you want to go into teaching now, we would basically what they gave me is a gigantic grant to enable me to go into teaching. So all of a sudden, I got to live out my dream, got a job in a very fancy, well-respected private school with a wonderful philosophy, had everything going for it. Within about 2 weeks of teaching, I knew I'd never want to leave working with kids. And within about 2 months, I knew that this was crazy, both what we weren't doing for students and what we unfortunately were doing to students. By the end of that year, I figured out that what was happening at that school that I was working at was symptomatic of what was going on everywhere in K-12 education, both in the public and private sector. And then was encouraged by starting to read back then about a bunch of different experts and whatnot talking about, hey, we really can do things differently. At a minimum, what was clear was the way we were doing it back then, which is 10, 13 years ago, was not nearly good enough. And I basically announced to my classes, I still remember it very vividly in my first year of teaching, that someday I will start my own school.
You did it. You did it. Alan, we're running out of time. I'm curious about technology, because technology is something that too many schools think perhaps that they're embracing, but they're not. I'm curious what the approach is at School for Tomorrow and what you recommend for the industry, if you call it that, as a whole.
Okay, so technology itself doesn't change the learning, but the technology, if you leverage it correctly, can both change the learning and you could change the whole model of education. So just as you see technology used in other industries to replace certain lower-level tasks that the labor does, the same thing has to happen in school. So that technology can replace a lot of the basic low-level stuff that teachers now do, enabling the teachers to do the higher-level thinking and the higher-level work of customization.
Completely agreed. Alan, the School for Tomorrow sounds like a fantastic program with campuses in Silver Spring, Maryland, and Reston, Virginia. Students in those areas are very, very lucky, and I'm sure many of our listeners will want to learn more. How can they get a hold of you? What's your website? Okay, website is sftedu.org, and anyone is welcome to email me at Shusterman, which is Shusterman at sftedu.org. I really hope that someday every kid can start to have the education our kids are having at School for Tomorrow. Well, we
I think
appreciate
it's
it, Alan.
for the country.
We'll have you back on. We appreciate your advice. You're listening to Get Down to Business. After the break, we've got more tips, advice, and information.